Friday, July 26th. Columbia's correspondents in Berlin, London, and Washington bring you now the latest developments on the political, economic, and battle fronts. But before bringing you the news direct, here is a late dispatch from Rome. An Italian communique says that Italian bombers have effectively bombed the British fortress of Gibraltar. The bombers made their attack after a long night flight, the communique said. But now the news from the German capital, reported by William Shira. Go ahead, Berlin.
This is Berlin. Messrs. Gibraltar and Manolescu, Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, respectively, of Romania, arrived at Salzburg this morning from Bucharest. Almost immediately, they began their conferences with the German Foreign Minister, Herr von Ribbentrop, at his Austrian country home at Fuschl. It's understood that the Romanians who have swung over to the Axis camp in one bound will be informed as to Germany's intentions in regard to the new European order as it affects the Balkans and Romania. It seems that little will be done until after the war. Then, judging from a hint in the German press the other day, the problem of the territories which Romania snatched from Hungary and Bulgaria after the last war may be solved under German supervision. Among other things, there will be an exchange of populations. Later in the week, the political leaders of Bulgaria and Slovakia will be received in Germany by Herr von Ribbentrop. They too to hear about the new order. As a matter of fact, though what happens in Europe obviously depends upon the outcome of the impending Anglo-German fight to the finish, we're beginning to get an idea of what the Germans envisage in the new European order dominated by themselves. Last night I mentioned a sensational dispatch published in the early editions of this morning's German press that a special German governor had been appointed for the 5 French departments which make up Brittany, and that a national committee of Bretons had proclaimed a program calling for a national Breton state friendly to Germany and under its own ruler. The German dispatch was based on an article in a weekly Breton paper called Le Breton. But the fact that the German press and radio gave it full publicity and approval seemed to mean that it was true, and that France was about to lose another one of its most important provinces. I noticed this morning that the story has been completely dropped from the late editions of the morning newspapers. We had a further picture yesterday of what the new economic setup in Europe is going to be like if Germany wins, from Dr. Walter Funk, who succeeded Dr. Schacht as Minister of Economics and President of the Reichsbank. Dr. Funk said he had been entrusted with drawing up plans by Reichsmarshal Goering. The most interesting feature of the economic order which Germany counts on setting up in Europe is that gold is to be discarded as the basis of European currency. That would leave us in America holding the bag, since we have most of the world's gold. But Dr. Funk suggested that if we depreciated the value of gold, we might be able to get rid of some. Some gold, he admitted, might still be useful in Europe to balance clearing accounts. The German Reichsmark, Dr. Funk left no doubt, is to have the dominant role in the new European currency system. Berlin, he said, would undoubtedly act as a clearinghouse for Europe's new monetary system. As I said last night, Dr. Funk's remarks were, in a way, a reply to Secretary of State Hull's address in Havana. He charged that the United States was defaming German products and, moreover, clinging to false economic dogmas. He said that as long as these things continued, German-American trade would be difficult. He also was very emphatic about Germany not wanting American intervention in its trade with South America. Either we'll trade with sovereign South American states, he put it, or there won't be any trade. As to the Roosevelt plan for a South American cartel, Dr. Funk wanted to know why Germany was being shut out of it. Summing up, he said, his plan for the new European economic order must guarantee Germany a maximum of economic security and a maximum also of goods consumption. This is the goal of the European economy, he concluded. The statement published by the entire German press today blames Great Britain for the torpedoing of the French transport Meknes bound from Southampton to Marseille with repatriated French naval personnel aboard. The statement argues that the German government was never informed about the ship. The torpedoing of the vessel is termed here, quote, a mean act of Churchill's, unquote. I return you now to CBS in New York.
That was William L. Shirer reporting from Berlin. Now we take you to the British capital for the report of Larry Lasser. Go ahead, London.
This is London. The Royal Air Force claims a record score against the German raiders who attacked England yesterday. With the help of anti-aircraft guns, the Air Ministry declares that 23 German planes were brought down in 24 hours. Yesterday's successes against the German Air Force brings the total of German plane losses since June 18th to 206. During the hours of darkness last night, there were only slight German air activity over southeast and southwest England and in Wales. But this morning, an enemy raider apparently jettisoned its bombs while being pursued by British fighters. Several houses and a school were smashed. Some people were hurt. German planes are reported over southeast England at this moment. The American decision to bar her ships from carrying oil to Spain and thus prevent the leakage to the Axis powers has been hailed by the press here as of great aid to the British blockade. It is felt here that there has been every evidence of oil shipments going from Spain to Germany and Italy. At the same time, while Britain officially extends her blockade to all Europe, it is announced that Britain will help Spain through an agreement with Portugal. Franco's government will obtain the wheat, which is so badly needed there, plus Portuguese colonial products. To facilitate payment of the latter, the British government is said to have agreed that purchases up to the value of $24 million can be paid through the Anglo-Spanish clearinghouse. Reports reaching England say that there are increasing fears of a famine in France this winter. It is pointed out that the number of refugees in unoccupied France has produced an excess population of millions in the French area. The French are said to be pleading with the Germans for measures to avoid wholesale starvation. Several truckloads of food are understood to be on the way to Paris from Switzerland. They have been sent by the American Red Cross. The London Daily Express states this morning that Hitler made a surprise visit to Salzburg last night to give new terms to Romania's premier and foreign minister. Herr von Ribbentrop was also in attendance. It is said that Romania has been asked to cede southern Dobruja to Bulgaria. The future of the Transylvania section of Romania, claimed by Hungary, may also be settled temporarily. If this is so, it seems clear that Germany wishes to stabilize conditions in the uneasy Balkans before completing plans for the attack on England. In London diplomatic circles, it is understood that diplomatic relations between Britain and Romania, if not definitely broken, have been at least jeopardized by the decision of the Bucharest government to recall its minister in London. Romania was the first East European country to receive a British guarantee 16 months ago. Since the capitulation of France, King Carol has obviously figured that the best chance of preserving some part of his country lies in an agreement with Germany. As you remember, Romania has already renounced the British guarantees against violation by Germany. The German map makers are apparently also busy in a plan which would entail the disappearance of Belgium as an independent nation, to create a vast buffer state between Germany and Britain. Reports from Belgium, reported by comments from German and Italian broadcasts, indicate that the Nazi aim is to reconstitute the ancient state of Flanders, with additions at the expense of Belgium, France, and Holland. The new state would have a projected seacoast extending from below French Boulogne to the islands of southern Zeeland, which formerly belonged to the Netherlands. This is in addition to Germany's proposed recognition of a new state of Brittany, comprising 5 of the western provinces of France, with a separate government, whose future relations with France would be established by treaty only. Britain is using every possible resource these days to complete its defenses against an invader. This morning, an appeal for thousands and thousands of hurdles to be made out of brushwood was directed to the people of Essex. The exact use to which these hurdles would be put is not disclosed, but it is said that they would provide an unpleasant surprise for any invaders of this country. We return you now to CBS in New York.
That was Larry Lasser reporting from London. Now the news of our own national affairs, reported from our national capital by John Charles Daly. We take you now to Washington.
The Senate Military Affairs Committee is expected to report out today its final draft of the pending conscription bill, providing military training for all American males between 21 and 45, and the registration of those between 18 and 64. The all-inclusive conscription bill yesterday was amended so as to compel the reemployment of all men drafted for military service. Employers engaged in interstate commerce who failed to reemploy workers after their year of training would be held guilty of unfair labor practice under the Wagner Labor Relations Act, according to a unanimous vote of the committee. The bill provides exemptions from combat training for those opposed to war from religious convictions. In conjunction with the action on the bill, the War Department announced the establishment of a general headquarters at the Army War College here in Washington. At first, they will be concerned simply with the training of the Army's expanded field forces. General George C. Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, pointed out that the move will give the Army a working field force headquarters which otherwise would have to be created out of whole cloth in an emergency. Said General Marshall, we're taking a few preliminary steps in times of peace this time, instead of running around after trouble starts getting a staff. Meantime, President Roosevelt has established a method for keeping American oil and scrap metal from the warring aggressors of both Europe and Asia. His latest executive order adds petroleum and petroleum products, as well as scrap iron and other scrap metals, to the embargo list created on July 2nd for the control of exports of munitions, machinery, and other materials needed for defense. It's not an actual embargo, but under the order, licenses for shipments of any of the commodities on the list may be refused. The presidential action followed shortly after it became known that the United States already has stopped 2 shipments of oil consigned to a Spanish port, but believed to be headed for Germany and Italy. Further steps in the national defense plans were taken in the Senate yesterday when Senator Josh Lee, the Oklahoma Democrat, introduced a bill which would empower the president to draft money as well as men. Purpose of the measure is to prevent profiteering and to make the financial resources of the nation available to the government for national defense on the same mandatory basis as manpower. The so-called drafting of money would be predicated on the ability of private citizens to lend it. It would set the same penalties for non-compliance to the drafting of money as would apply to the drafting of men. Commenting on the bill, isolationist Senator Wheeler observed dryly, and I quote, "If we're in such an emergency as to conscript the lives of men, we should go all the way and conscript profits." Yesterday, at the demand of Secretary Stimson, the new Secretary of War, the President accepted the resignation of Louis Johnson as Assistant Secretary of War. Rumored the White House, Johnson was to be made the 6th administrative assistant to the President and act as his contact with the defense program. Capital comment was, on that one, just a tongue in the cheek. Stressed, however, was one fact by Presidential Secretary Steve Early, the fact that from time immemorial, all cabinet heads had the right to choose their assistant secretaries. For the first time since they were nominated by the Democratic Convention, the Democratic standard-bearers, Franklin D. Roosevelt and Henry Aggard Wallace, sat down together yesterday and discussed campaign strategy. Afterwards, Mr. Wallace said that first he will do no political campaigning until he is officially notified of his selection as a candidate for the vice presidency. He would not commit himself as to whether he will resign from the cabinet before he starts his campaign. To quote Mr. Wallace, the cabinet question is not a matter up for discussion until political activities begin. I do not interpret notification as political activity. I intend to look up all the precedents and decide what is fair and just and right for the American people. Mr. Wallace summed up the conference. I did not discuss the question of whether I will have to do most of the campaigning for the coming election. We, Mr. Roosevelt and Mr. Wallace, talked matters over from various angles. We made no plans whatsoever. The question of a swing around the country will have to be a matter for future discussion. End of quotation. It is a favorite presidential strategy to take refuge in a technicality of protocol when he has no desire to commit himself, and so Henry Aggard Wallace will not tip the Democratic hand until he has been notified of his selection on or about August 20th next. Informed Washington, remembering Mr. Roosevelt's statement that he would stick to running the country and campaign from the White House in Hyde Park, is whispering that President Roosevelt will find no dearth of parks and fountains throughout the nation that needs must be dedicated by the presidential hand. That is, if the Wilkie steamroller continues. We return you now to New York.
Thus we conclude this morning's report of European and national developments, reported from Berlin by William L. Schauer, from London by Larry Lasser, and from Washington by John Charles Daly. Larry Elliott speaking. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.